Welcome, game dev adventurers, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Will Shen, who has spent 14 years at Bethesda, about game design leadership. Really excited for this one.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a weekly event we host in our Discord that we actually record live, and we mostly don't edit. So we'd love to see you in the next Wednesday's event. There are links to join down below. As always, I'm your host, Willem Delventhal, the headmaster here at the Indie Game Academy and the self-proclaimed Purple Wizard of Joy. And joining me today is Will Shen. Will has a storied history of game design, including 14 years at Bethesda, and most recently, a little bit of time spent at Something Wicked Games. Will, welcome to the show. I'm pumped to talk about game design leadership. What are you having for lunch today?
Hey, Willem, thanks. I'm actually just having some tea that I brewed up.
What kind of tea? That is the most important question.
Oh, I think it's like decaf chai.
Nice.
That's my go-to.
Are you one of those psychopaths that doesn't drink caffeine?
I try not to. I was on caffeine for like a decade, and when you start crashing on the commute home, this is obviously before the pandemic, but when you start crashing on the commute home a few times, you're like, I really should stop. So
Maybe
I try to
that's just
limit
not
how
worth
much
it.
caffeine I take in.
Nice. I've tried in various times to cut it out of my life, but it feels like Popeye's spinach to me. When I just need to get things done, I just pump it in.
Yeah, every once in a while, I'm like, I really need a boost, but it's every time you use it, it just lowers your tolerance just a little bit. So you have to be careful. Great power, great responsibility.
I love that. Well, awesome. It's really exciting to have you on, Will. I had the privilege of going to GDC this year, and among my favorite talks was Will's on basically design leadership, yes, and quest design in the storied history of Bethesda, including some talks about Fallout 4, Far Harbor, Starfield, and a couple of other games. And it was a fantastic talk, and I had to accost Will at the stand and ask if he'd come on the show. So thank you for being here. Also, the fact that we share a name as well as a facial hair and hairstyle makes me think that perhaps you're actually, level 3 Willem or something. And one day I will also give up caffeine.
All wills share a hive mind.
Hey, we're not supposed to share that. All right. So let's definitely get into the podcast. I'm really pumped to talk a little bit. The first thing, as always, the first question, as always, is to ask for your origin story. So, Will, how did you get started and how did you get to where you are today?
So I was a professional writer. I was teaching at the University of Maryland, and I was doing writing for an IT firm. And I was looking for my next job, and a bunch of my friends were like, "You should join this local game studio. It's called Bethesda Softworks." And they did this cool game called Oblivion, and I told them that's a terrible idea. I've never done any game or creative writing. I was a technical writer, but I kept it in the back of my mind, and I started looking at their website, and eventually they had a design internship open when they were working on Fallout 3. And I applied to that and got in through a cold application, which is a huge stroke of luck. And then they sat me down and said, "Okay, we're going to pay you half what you're making now because it's an internship. It's only going to be for 6 months. And you will have no job at the end of this. We are guaranteeing that you will not be employed here by the end of this internship." So I thought, that's great. It's a super A+ career move. And
you're like everything I've ever wanted.
Yeah, everything I ever wanted, just a pay cut and guaranteed unemployment. And they were true to their word. As soon as the internship was over, they were like, "Okay, thank you, get out." So, but it was a really fun time working on Fallout. Like I played the original Fallout 1 and 2, and so seeing it in full 3D in a big open world for the first time before everyone else got to, because they were still developing it, that was super fun. And it was really fun to hang out with everyone, big group of, game nerds. And so I kept it in the back of my mind, and I kept applying for game jobs based off that internship. And I eventually worked at Big Huge Games, which on what eventually became Kingdoms of Amalur. It was all the basic design, tech, and infrastructure. But Big Huge at the time was owned by THQ, and THQ soon went bankrupt after I joined. And they were looking. I remember distinctly an executive from THQ came down and said, "Firing you all is going to get THQ back on the right track."
Wow.
and they went completely bankrupt soon after. And so that was one of the, we're going through a lot in the industry right now, but THQ at the time was what was called like a middle tier publisher, right? They published a lot of like movie tie-in games and other things that were making a lot of money at that point in the games industry. And then eventually that all went away, and THQ really got hit hard. And so they didn't quite know what to do, and eventually they went bankrupt. Big Huge Games was eventually purchased by 38 Studios, but before that happened, I reached back out to my colleagues, my former colleagues at Bethesda, and they had just started working on Skyrim. And so they were staffing up, and they were like, "Hey, why don't you come back on board? You have a little more experience now. Maybe we can make use of you." So I came back.
The only connection you had with them was the internship, correct?
Yeah, it was the internship.
Wow.
And I had maintained, my connections with the folks there, because I was still in the area. I was still in Maryland. Big Huge Games was in Timonium. And I remember when I went back to interview to work on Skyrim, one of the big things they remembered was I showed up for the Fallout 3 launch party, even though I wasn't employed by them at that point. But I really just wanted to, enjoy the launch and say hi to everyone. And they were like, "Oh, that meant a lot to us. It felt like you were still kind of part of the team, even though we didn't have work for you." So, little things like that can end up really mattering. And then I came back, I was fortunate to be able to come back and work on Skyrim. And I had a really bad first year. I couldn't get anything done or anything right. And I was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna get fired." It's like, this is gonna be round 2 of getting kicked out of Bethesda.
Another 6 months.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And eventually, I sat down at my workstation and was like, let's not try to do this the right way, or try to do this according to the guidebooks or any of the metrics or standards. Let's just try to make this sequence what I would hope it would be if I were playing it. That was a big turning point. And, my work improved by leaps and bounds. And they eventually asked me to do the opening. The last year of development on Skyrim, we had done some of the opening, but that was primarily done by one of the lead designers, Kirk Holman. And he was swamped doing so much else. And so they wanted someone to come in and actually drive, hey, we get the opening done. Because we only have a few months before we have to put this thing in the can. So I came on board and finished up the opening. And then when we finished Skyrim, I was asked to come on board, one of the first people on Fallout 4 when we were working on that. This was a little bit after the pre-pro with the core leadership. So I wasn't quite part of the core leadership at that point.
Wow.
But
so I want to back up 1 second. If you work on the Skyrim intro, does that mean you're responsible for, "Hey, you're finally awake"?
Yes. Yeah, I wrote, "Hey, you're finally awake." I think I wrote 10 versions of that line, and I think Kurt may have wrote a couple of versions back when he was prototyping it. And yeah, we eventually settled on, "Hey, you're finally awake."
Does it just delight you every time somebody has a meme where like something random is happening and the screen goes black and it's Skyrim?
Yeah, it's great. I usually say, "You're welcome," and "I'm sorry," because the funny thing about that opening is it's been seen so many times, sometimes multiple times, because people replay Skyrim, but they also, it became its own joke, but people bought it over and over again on different platforms.
Yeah.
Because, it's on this platform now, or there's a, next gen platform. Let me buy it again and get all my mods on it. And have some fun in Skyrim all over again. So people have seen that opening a lot.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what reinforced it. So I'm really honored to have been a part of something that so many people have enjoyed. But I know a lot of people were like, "Oh man, this cart ride." Can this cart ride end anytime sooner? When people complain about the length of the cart ride, I'm like, it's like, I think I clocked it at it's just under 2 minutes.
Yeah,
So
they're
it's
wrong
not
if they complain. I can
it's not
definitively
that
say
bad,
that for
but I
you.
get it. When you see it,
Iconic.
10 times, and it's 20 minutes in your mind, right?
Maybe, yes.
Yeah.
Amazing. I interrupted you though. So after you worked on Skyrim intro, you moved on to.
Oh, I got pulled on to help out on Fallout 4 when it was in pre-production, and so I ended up getting tapped to do the opening for that as well. So I did the world before the bombs fall, and you being put in the vault and you emerging from into the wasteland for the first time. And I did a bunch of other stuff. I wrote Diamond City and Good Neighbor, and the characters of Nick Valentine, Piper, and Hancock, and it was me and Emil Pagliarulo and Liam Collins that kind of shared the bulk of the writing between the three of us. So we had to unify a voice between all those characters, which was a lot of fun. And and so worked on that, and then worked on Fallout 76 to help launch that game, and then to sort of relaunched that game with the Wastelanders update. I was part of the spearhead that's like, hey, figure out how to bring NPCs into this multiplayer game. So worked on that with a really great engineer, Scott Smith, and figured out how we're going to get networked dialogue to work in that game, which is an interesting challenge. And then I was the lead quest designer for Starfield, and then eventually I became design director at the studio, helping kind of put together and interview and help hire a few of the future design leadership in the, I guess you would call it the middle leadership. So I had a lead quest designer, a lead gameplay designer, a lead level designer, lead systems designer that I was then mentoring for a bit before I left to go join a startup, Something Wicked Games, which is founded by former Bethesda and Obsidian developers and leadership.
Wow. What a storied history. I love the fact that, most of the people who listen to this podcast are, of course, beginners. They're just getting started. They're just trying to break in. So I love that early history of yours. And I love imagining a world where Bethesda is like, I guess I'll go do an internship there. I don't know. That sounds fine.
It was a different time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard similar stories. It's one of the things that I love about doing this podcast. I've heard similar stories from, a few of the older hat designers who've been in the industry a lot longer than most of us, where the game industry, was not hot at that time. The game industry was still starting to get public traction, but largely is still for the dorks. Definitely not true anymore. Games are cool now.
Yeah, games are mainstream. Hollywood is all in on games. When Hollywood is in on what you're doing, then you're in every household at that point. So now everyone knows what we do, and we've kind of spoiled ourselves. I mean, collectively spoiled ourselves with the all the money, right? Money is flooded into the games industry, and that certain things happen when there's a lot of money up for grabs.
It's very true. Certain things have happened indeed, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit. But I do think something I love to repeat, because I think I don't know. It's something that I at least didn't understand for a while. Games make money. We're a really hot industry. We're half the age of Hollywood, and we are already worth twice as much as them. That's pretty nuts. Hollywood is mainstream, but games are bigger, despite being a little less mainstream. All right, so design leadership. Oh, actually, I wanted to call out one thing. The fact that you came to that party for your ex-Bethesda workers, and then that got you... Oh, Craig has just disconnected. Let me make sure that's still here. It almost never fails. All right, we're back. Thank you, Craig. The fact that you basically just showed up for them, and then that wound up getting you a job is really cool, and I think is a lesson for everybody to take away, even in this more difficult industry as it stands now. A lot of the time, it is those little moments that wind up landing you a job. And it's not because you did some big grand gesture. It's because you showed up for a holiday party when you weren't employed and, they had already fired you or at least let you go.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an element, especially in networking, and this doesn't really matter what industry, but at the end of the day, you're spending 8+ hours with your colleagues, and
Yeah.
being someone that you want to be around can be very important when it comes to landing jobs. Also, and the same is true in reverse. If you don't like being around the people you're working with, then it might be time to move on. If you can. Obviously, it can be hard to find work, and we all have to do what we can. But it's reciprocal. You want to be around people you want to work with, and
Mhm.
they also want to be around people they want to work with. So
Yeah.
if you can show up for folks, that can go a long way.
I totally agree with that. An old mentor of mine at some point said, you can kind of think about this like a marriage. You're going to spend maybe more hours with them than your actual, romantic partner. So it better be somebody you enjoy spending time with, and you
Oh
better be
yes.
somebody that others enjoy spending time with. We all have those abrasive workers we don't want to hang out with.
Oh yes. Yeah,
uh,
we can get into that too.
we run into a few of those. So, design leadership is the subject that we wound up landing on for this podcast episode. And it's one that I really care about. It's something I'm trying to figure out how to move into myself. It's something that I think a lot of people dream of stepping into one day. Game designers are probably the biggest demographic, maybe narrative designers in this community. But game designers are definitely one of the biggest ones. So, I'd love to just kind of get your intro. Like, what is the 101 to game design leadership? What is it? What does a design leader do?
Yeah, so some basic definitions of design leadership. So the first rule, which is I think true in all aspects of game development, is there are no rules. Every place does it a little differently and defines it a little differently. So you might end up as a design lead and you're a manager. You're hiring people, you're interviewing people, you're deciding whether they should leave the company, right? They should be fired. You're trying to develop people's career, but that's not always what lead is. Sometimes design lead is you're reviewing all the work, you're providing technical notes. Hey, you're supposed to set up things this way, or our goal is this, and I don't feel like your design reflects that goal. Those kinds of feedback loops might be both. It could be that, as a lead, it could be a first among equals scenario where you are also an implementer. You just have you're the person everyone comes to with questions. That can also
Mhm.
be something where you actually don't have any feedback or creative authority. You're just someone everyone is going to for help. And that's part of the reason why you see in a lot of I think big tech handles this by labeling people between manager and like IC, individual contributor, to sort
Mhm.
of try to delineate, hey, who are the people who can hire and fire versus the people who are supposed to make things. But in games, there isn't that kind of a standard, and so leadership can mean all sorts of stuff. And the big thing to ask yourself, in your own career as you try to move into leadership is, what does it mean for you? Why? Why do you want to do this? Because all aspects of leadership it's at its core, it's more responsibility. It's usually more stressful as well. And the reason why the reason why it's more stressful is because you're moving out of the realm of technical expertise and into the realm of people. The core of every project is the people making it. And once you step into leadership, you are dealing with those people more and more directly. And your own performance is measured by whether or not you are helping those people. And the dark secret of all leadership, and especially design leadership, is you can't make those people do anything they don't want to do. We're in a creative problem solving business. And when you're doing
Mhm.
creative problem solving, the creative problem solvers can do whatever they want. Obviously, you can go to them and say, hey, you were supposed to do this. Why didn't you? You can put pressure on them. But at the end of the day, they have to figure it out and do it.
Mhm.
And they will come up with their own ways of doing things. So you find yourself in a position where you are influencing other people in their lives and trying to get to their root motivations so that you can then build a bridge between what you're actually trying to get done and what they're trying to do. So
Mm.
there's an old TV series called The Muppet Show that Jim Henson made, where poor Kermit the Frog is desperately trying to get his group of actors to do their jobs so that they can keep the theater open. And that's exactly what it's like being
Hmm.
a leader. You are frantically trying to get everyone to do what they're supposed to be doing, at least from your perspective, and they are not doing any of that. They're off on their own thing. They're trying to accomplish their own goals. They see things differently than you do. And you have to somehow get them to at least get on stage at the right time and execute, and somehow it'll come out okay. And that
Hmm.
chaos and uncertainty is one of the biggest headaches of stepping into that role. People are very unpredictable. You
Hmm.
know, that's one of the great things about them. We're human beings. We're clever. We're very adaptable. We can go off in many, many different directions. We have our own reasons for doing things. And so when you step into a role of wanting to somehow corral those cats, then you're signing yourself up for a world of headaches. So, you know, make sure that's what you want before you start walking down that career path.
That's super cool. I love this is a fantastic intro. What I got out of that like primary lesson, design leadership is herding cats. Does that sound about right?
This is absolutely what it is. You
Amazing.
know,
I love the
especially
Muppet
in
Show
design.
metaphor.
Designers are very, very cat-like.
Yeah, I feel that. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes about management in general is actually from my own brother, who's an engineering manager over at Meta, working on the Horizon project.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he's a smart guy, and the quote was very simple: "Your job as a manager is to unblock your team." So he talks a lot about exactly what you're mentioning, where it's not so much about like penalizing or putting the pressure on for the most part, anyway. A little bit of that, yes, but it's more about learning the individual contributors, their motivational sort of matrix, and then utilizing that. I mean, as a designer, really, that's basically design on its own. Utilizing that to get to unblock people and get them working in a way that works for them.
Yeah, exactly. I can share an anecdote from past projects. So, uh, Fallout 4, for example, there was a very strict dialogue system. It was
Mm.
four discrete buttons. Those buttons had a kind of a typical or default meaning, and there's only so much text on each one of them.
Mhm.
And it was also a system where we wanted there to always be four choices up all the time, and so four choices would lead to four choices would lead to four choices. But what ended up happening over the course of the entire game and is having to repeat four branching choices over and over again just sort of encouraged people to make their dialogue more linear, because the explosive like I have to manage now four choices, which is going to branch out into four choices, and it would explode out the conversation graph and make things very, very complicated quickly, even when you were trying to do very simple things.
Mm.
And in hindsight, when we were doing the postmortems and the retrospective, we were like, oh, this ended up. We were trying to encourage people to provide a lot of choice and for there to be a lot of meat there, but it ended up blocking a lot of people from doing more in-depth writing work, because they had to kind of warp all of their thoughts around this system, which had very specific, almost sort of draconian rules.
Mm.
And so when we were doing the dialogue system for Fallout 76 and Starfield, you crack that open and we're like, okay, we're going to go back to a any number of choices kind of writing style, and we'll have a couple of loose rules, but we won't try to enforce it to like hard enforce it, right? The code won't try to enforce these rules the way we were doing that in Fallout. And we and then in the course of production for both of those, the Wastelanders update for 76 and Starfield, we blew the writing budget right out of the water, because all of a sudden everyone was free to sort of make conversations however they wanted. And even though there were a varying number of choices, sometimes it was only two choices, sometimes it was five or six or however many, because you could just sort of get in the flow of writing out the conversation the way you wanted. All of a sudden the entire design staff was able to like maximize their productivity and it was something like double what we had accounted for. Okay, well, based on Fallout 4, they can only write, maybe 100,000 lines, and then they ended up writing about 250,000 lines. So it really shows you like, hey, you have to get to the root cause. Everyone's kind of mumbling and groaning about this dialogue system, but what is it really? It's like, oh, it's because it's so restrictive. And if we can just let people do what they want within reason, then they'll be able to get into this flow state, and that flow state is going to enable them to do their best work.
That's awesome. It reminds me of the metaphor that I've heard before. That's like leading with an open palm. So you do have to lead. You do have to like enforce a little bit, but it's never closed fist. It's never like, I'm going to beat you up for not getting there. It's instead open palm, working with them, figuring out what works for your team, and leaning into that more than anything else.
Yeah, and I think especially with game development and other creative management, your real responsibility is to kind of point in the horizon and then be surprised by how they get there. Oh, going to build a raft. All right, well, you could have just taken that path that I laid out, but go for it. But then they get to the other end and they're like, hey, we found this big treasure along the waterway, and we're glad we built that raft. You don't know. That's the big thing. You don't know what they're going to come up with and what it's going to look like at the end of the day. And as a leader, if you're trying to get a very particular vision, that's going to be very stressful because it's people making it and people are unpredictable. So I say my big advice would be, if you find yourself in leadership, lean into the positive aspects of surprise. When people are doing their work and they're enjoying it, they're going to come up with things that you wouldn't have thought of, but that's better, because you get the benefit of their perspective in that case, which is going to enable you to find things that you wouldn't have anticipated. So when we were doing Far Harbor, which was the Fallout 4 expansion, we really had a big goal of, we're going to do really deep story this time. We were trying to do that in Fallout 4. We succeeded in a few areas, but we really want to double down and make this the big story expansion. And all the endings that the designers came up with were way more than I had anticipated. And it was a real act of faith to be like, okay, well, our goal, I said our goal was we're going to do big story stuff, so I have to let them do it, even though I'm terrified because there's so many of these, and I know these are complicated, but they were so pumped, and I just had to sort of let them follow that road where it was going to take them, and it ended up creating a lot of fun surprises.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's the mixed soup of creativity. Like, if you as a leader are too rigid, you're ensuring your vision comes to pass. If you are allowing to this element of surprise, if you're allowing your team instead to create their vision, then you've got the soup of visions mixing together that theoretically is better than any one person could possibly conceive of. It's all just chasing the fun together. I especially love the quote. I'm going to get this tattooed along my leg. Your responsibility is to point in the right direction and then be surprised by how they get there. That's a really awesome one.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. But that's what it's like. It's the most infuriating thing that happens when you first step into leadership, especially if you're like, overly responsible and an overachiever. You're like, I'm going to lay out this perfect track and everyone's going to have this real comfortable time walking down this nice road I laid out. And then no one takes that road. They immediately jump into the water. They start going through the sand pit. You're like, why are you doing this? And you have to realize that they are on their own journey. It's not your journey, right? It's their journey. There's our journey collectively, us getting all the way to the end together. But they're not you, and you shouldn't try to make them you. That was definitely a trap I fell into early on. I'll just make everyone like me, and then everything will be great. No, that's not how it works.
I love that. Yeah, so what I'm hearing is design leadership is being a D&D DM.
Oh, yes.
You plan
it really prepares you.
pages and pages and pages of the adventure, and then they just hang out in the tavern instead.
Oh yeah. I've DM'd for years, and I've had the whole evolution of all the very careful preparing and anxiety over all the encounters to I have like 5 bullet points And what are you all going to do? Like, we really love pets. Can you introduce more pets? Sure. Why not? Want a horse?
That's
Let me introduce Mr. Nays.
nice. That's the AI approach to DMing. Awesome. So I have taken too much of your time, but I have a last question for you because I think the audience will be curious about this, and then we're going to get to the community questions. My last question is, what are your tips, your one-on-one again, maybe, on actually breaking into design leadership specifically? How do you become a design leader?
Yeah. So again, there's a lot of different avenues. Especially if you're like, hey, I'm working at a studio, how do I break into leadership? That answer could be different depending on the studio. So, but typically the sort of baseline advice I would give is start by sort of becoming your own leader. Don't rely on, obviously, don't tell the leadership above you, piss off, I'm going to do things my way. Instead, what you want to do is you act like you are the one who is managing your own work. So look at your own schedule and tasks and try to estimate and try to get things done a little bit ahead of schedule, and see if you can improve your time management in that regard. And the same thing with the creative side. Go ahead and take a little extra time to run through and review your own work as if you were the audience, or as if you were the design leader, and ask yourself, what are the things I would want to do? What are the things like, what are the obvious things, like, hey, this thing is broken. Let's fix that up. Start delivering designs that have gone through that level of scrutiny as if someone has already reviewed it. When that happens and you combine that with managing your own time, suddenly not only are you delivering things that are ahead, but you're delivering things at a higher quality level. And for the leadership above you, that's an amazing relief, because a lot of time is spent trying to shore up things that are either late or not coming in at the quality level that the team as a whole is expecting. And so having someone on the team who can deliver at that level gives you a huge amount of, oh, I don't have to worry about this person, they're always on top of it. It also is, if you can get into that pattern for yourself, it's a big relief for you, because now all of a sudden you're not dependent on the management above you in order to deliver things that you feel are of quality and on time. You're not always going to have a proactive producer or scheduler. You're not always going to have a boss who's available all the time. Sometimes leadership gets very overloaded and they're not delivering you feedback, and it can be really nerve-wracking. So you have to take that on yourself and be your own first line of defense. And when you can do that, then all of a sudden you're in a position where you can be available for extra work, which is a little, obviously, we want to have work-life balance. But if you're getting things done ahead of schedule, all of a sudden you've got time to help other people. And when you're in a position where you're helping everyone else, that is effectively what leadership is anyway. And so you kind of can become essentially like a shadow leader through that avenue. Hey, this person's always on time. They're always delivering things that work. They don't have to be the best things. They just have to be the most, hey, everything's like, all the corners are tucked in, all the hatches are battened down, and they're always around helping people. And so the team gets used to seeing you in a position of leadership because they're looking to you for assistance. And so that can be an avenue to break into leadership regardless of where you are. And then the caveat there, of course, is that every team and culture is different. Your leadership might be expecting different things. And so you want to figure out the specific details of whatever your organization is and what they value. There's going to be what you value and what they value. And you have to make sure that you understand what those two things are and where they cross and where they don't. So if you're constantly delivering what you value, but that's not what they value, they're never going to see you as valuable. That doesn't mean you're not valuable. It just means that you're not playing to the game that they're playing. And if you want to ascend the ranks of leadership, you've got to play their game.
That's awesome. That was a really excellent answer. To distill it down, what I heard there, tell me if I'm right here. Number one is basically relieve responsibility from your own leads, become your own leader. Number two is be available for a little extra work. Work-life balance, though. Number 3 is become a shadow leader. And then number 4 is figure out what the lead's value and embody that. That sound about
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Nice. Fantastic answer. All right. So I have taken enough of your time. This has been a fantastic chat already. It's time to get a couple community questions in before we say goodbye. So Rick is on stage. Rick, would you like to ask the first community question?
Yeah, so I'm curious, like when you're designing something that's going to be built out, how do you consider the phases of development and then executing your design? So you won't suddenly have the final product immediately. So you need to figure out a layered approach and how it's executed. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, and I think this speaks to what we would call agile development, where you're trying to do continuous integration into the software. Most places use something something along those lines. So what you're always asking yourself through all the phases is what is the MVP, minimum viable product, that we need right now. So an example of that is when we were doing Wastelanders for Fallout 76, and obviously network, multiplayer dialogue and instantiation is a huge undertaking. And we're like, hey, plotting this out on a technical roadmap, it's going to be like a year before all of this stuff is done. So we had to break it down into, okay, what is the most important thing for us right now, which is, hey, we know we have a lot of content we need to deliver. So let's just do the back end and the tools development and the basic data structure so that people can start working. And then eventually in the game, we'll get it to function. So that was one of the first things we did. And that was part of the reason why we were able to deliver that update in a timely manner, is because we weren't blocking the entire content, departments on what they needed to make, because we had prioritized getting them up and running as soon as possible, even if we couldn't test everything.
All right, so it sounds like you're definitely considering what other roles on the team have to do first. Is there a way you triage what you're designing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You want to prioritize everything. And so once you know, hey, here's what we're making, and here's all the features we want, and here are all the breakdowns of the features, let's prioritize them, especially in regard to dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, every person who is on the team who can't do their job is burning time and money. So we have to make sure that they are doing their job. Also, their morale. Like, no one wants to sit around and not do anything. So let's make sure that we're prioritizing anything that would block the other departments, unless they're already working at full tilt. Oh, hey, art is, for example, our art pipeline, they're able to make things now, but eventually they're going to need I don't know, a sophisticated tagging solution, because we have a lot of assets and they need to be able to go through them organizationally, because we're going to get a ton of bugs at the back end. Okay, we might not need to make that right now. We can wait, but once we get into kind of post-production and we're trying to finish the game, then we really need to have that tech available then, because that's when it will really matter. So some of that comes from experience, but you can kind of anticipate, hey, when will this feature be needed by this team? And if that answer is it needs to be soon, or else they're not doing anything, then that has to have more weight.
Excellent. So in summary, keep your finger on the pulse of what the other teams are up to so you can intelligently triage.
Yeah, absolutely. Priorities have to be a collaborative process, for sure. Oftentimes it's between design and tech, but sometimes it's between design and art as well. Design asks for a lot of art. And so you want to make sure you're talking to each other. And another trick is, whenever you ask for something new, wait at least 2 minutes for the other person to say no and be upset, because no one wants new work dumped on them. And our reflex is always to say no. But again, we're a problem solving industry. So if you give someone a little breathing room, they'll come up with an answer. Either something that is, oh, actually we can do it, or actually I think if we did it this way, that would be a lot easier and I could fit it in. So always, even though we're in a time crunch industry, patience is actually a virtue.
Awesome. Thank
answer.
you.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking your question, Rick. I've got the next question from the audience. I'm going to read for Basil Knight. Basil Knight asks, how realistic is it to make a lateral transition into leadership from a non-gaming industry?
Oh, interesting. That can be hard.
Mm-hmm.
the soft skills are there. That soft skills are can be difficult to showcase, but they're the most important in leadership. Again, you're moving out of the realm of technical expertise and into leadership. But we're actually bad at picking leaders. This is a phenomenon not just in games but in general. If you look at like the broader management science, what we find is the best leaders tend to be people who aren't the best. They're just the best people because it's a people skill job, and that's different from a technical job. But we tend as an industry to want to play it safe and, oh, well, the best technical person should be in charge because then they can be responsible if things go wrong. But that's not necessarily the best leader. You might actually want someone who's sort of middle of the road, or even someone who doesn't have specific technical skills but is a great people person in that slot. So part of the difficulty of a lateral move is just we're not good at identifying people who are good at this. And that's why a lot of kind of those kind of promotions and those jobs are more available through word of mouth, and people that the people who are making the decision already trust you. And so it can be hard to move from side to side. One of the things, though, that can help is to sort of maximize some of the technical aspects of leadership. Like, hey, if you've done scheduling, if you've hired and interviewed, or even done firings, which can be unfortunate, but that happens. Being able to do that part of the job can be something that's a little bit more kind of demonstrable and provable. So you could probably emphasize those parts, but it can be hard. Lateral moves are hard.
Yeah, I would guess. I don't know too much about this myself, but from what I know of the industry and people breaking into various roles, I would guess that it would be pretty hard. The game industry tends to expect that you already have game industry experience before you enter any kind of management or lead role. So probably it will help, but probably you'll still need to do a couple of more like individual contributor roles before you become a lead. But awesome, great question. I'm going to ask this next one for the... Oh, never mind. Raven is here. All right, Raven, I'm going to get you on stage. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I feel like you partially answered this, but from starting out on Skyrim, how'd you grow Bethesda's confidence in your abilities and go on to contribute to such important parts of their games, such as being lead designer of Far Harbor?
Oh, let's see. So the big thing was, again, figuring out what the studio valued. So when I first came on board, I thought I was coming from, IT, and I was like, okay, let's make sure that all of the documentation and guidelines are followed strictly, because that's what we worry about in IT. We want to make sure all the T's are crossed. And that ended up slamming me right into a wall, because, hey, just because you made sure that everything you made works, that doesn't mean it's fun, or more importantly, not confusing. And so I was getting tons of feedback from the leadership of, we don't know what this is or what you're talking about. And so I had to learn to throw all that out. Hey, this is a studio that really values the player experience, and if I'm not delivering on that, then I'm going to have a real short career here. So that was an 11th hour insight, very late at night when I was crunching on Skyrim. But once I figured that out, then things got a lot easier. It's okay. And then it's starting to put in the work of, okay, how do I build out all of this content? And another thing is, I was able to figure out ways to cut down on the busy work. So there's always a lot of inefficiencies in any like tool set that you're making, whether it's Unreal or Unity or whatever, where you end up having to do a lot of stuff over and over again. But if you think about it in terms of like the way programmers work, programmers reuse code all the time. So you can also reuse content all the time. You can take, not a complete copy paste, but you can kind of take a template of, hey, I have a simple a person asks you to find an item in a dungeon quest and take the logic that you built out once and then multiply that a few times wherever else you need it. And that was another way I was able to figure out how to maximize my time. And that's just an example, but the basic principle there is, hey, time is the enemy. We're always running out of time or under deadline. And so figuring out ways to get time back is what you're always sort of looking for. You know, a lot of people fall into the trap of, I want to build this big thing and it's going to be super impressive because it's big and elaborate and complicated and this, fine, Swiss watch of a design. But then, one gear goes off and it all falls apart. So instead, I made a ton of very, very, very simple work, but it was always on time and it was always just a little bit better than you were expecting. In terms of, hey, handle all the contingencies, handle all the chaos of the open world. And that's really what sort of built up the confidence that I was going to be able to deliver. The one of the things that's a little soul crushing is when you work for a studio, it's not about you, it's about us collectively. And especially as a designer, that kind of hurts because part of the reason we get into this business is we want to express ourselves. But when you're part of a larger studio, you're really learning how to express the studio. And once you figure out that that's the job, then it's a lot easier to convince everyone to go ahead with you because they know you'll deliver what they see, not what you personally want. But that also means you don't get to say what you personally want, which is obviously why a lot of people end up going solo or go the indie route.
That was such a great answer. Thank you for answering it, and Raven, thank you for asking that one. It's definitely it seems like a big sort of summary of a lot of what you're saying is deliver your work on time and make it a little bit better than expected, and do that consistently.
Yeah, if you're a consistent performer in that way, then people will start looking to you. Either your colleagues will ask, how do you do it? Or the leadership will be like, well, thank goodness you're here. Someone's, delivering. This work is really hard and it's easy to fall into rabbit holes and it's easy for things to go wrong and you to lose a lot of time. And so you're always fighting against that.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Awesome. All right. It is time for the community question of the day, which is going to be, we're going to have probably one more question after this. The question is simple. This is where we reiterate one of the most important things we learned from Will for some House Cup points. So the first person to type the correct answer to this in the chat gets 3 House Cup points. The question is, what is your responsibility, according to Will Shen, as a design leader? What is your responsibility as a design lead? First person to get that answer in the chat will get some points. I'm going to call Wendy up on stage. This may be the last question of the day, and then I'll call it out. Nice. Color Optimist gets the points. Let us know which house you want those to go to. The answer is lean into the positive aspects of surprise. I'm going to read it verbatim, though, because, Will, I thought it was really good. Your responsibility is to point in the right direction and then be surprised about how they get there.
Yes, thank you.
Love it. All right, Wendy, would you like to ask your question?
Hello. So a 2-part question. I was wondering if you teach game design or if you have taught it, and what resources would you recommend for someone just starting out in the field?
Okay, cool. Thank you. I have not taught game design, at least not professionally.
Do you want to?
I wouldn't mind. If there's opportunities out there, let me know.
I'll reach out.
But in terms of resources that are available, everyone has different learning preferences. For example, I've recently been reading through some of the documentation for Godot, and I'm like, this is great. This is a great game engine, but it's also a kind of game engine that I'm very familiar with, like, object-oriented events and functions and things like that. So that's been great for me. I really enjoyed when I was learning Unreal. I really enjoyed I think Udemy. That's one of those online learning platforms, and they have a couple of really good Unreal ones, especially the one that's called Making an Unreal Games with C++, which seems intimidating because a lot of people get intimidated by learning to code, but it's actually very light and goes over a lot of very basic game design stuff. And so if you're looking for like a class, then I don't remember the exact name of it, but if you go to Udemy and look at all the Unreal classes and you look for the one that also talks about C++ programming, that's probably the one. And another thing that's really handy, just as a general theory book, is was it Jesse Schell's the Art of Game Design with the lenses. That one is a really good book, and which is an incredible achievement considering how broad design is. But he does a good job of breaking down, and the central thesis of the book, which is that it's all about perspective, and what you're trying to see in your design is the big takeaway from that one. And that's always going to be true because every game is different.
Love that. Awesome.
Thank
Answer
you.
your question, Wendy?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Sweet. I'm currently finally reading Game Feel, and it's a good book. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. So we are at the end of the episode. There's a really great question here. Maybe Nishida, I'm going to ask for you because this is such a good question. Rapid fire answer, Will, because we're out of time.
Sure.
As a game design lead, how do you establish boundaries for your design vision so that only quality gets into the end product? To me, that's like balancing the team's vision versus the overall vision. How do you do that?
Yeah, the thing that you do there is you establish a set of high-level goals that everyone agrees to at the very beginning. So this can obviously this could lead to some arguments and disagreement, but that's exactly why you do it, because you want to do it at the beginning. Because once you have those goals set and everyone has said, yes, we agree to these goals, then that is an objective thing that you can point to whenever there's a disagreement. Otherwise, it's a personality contest. You don't, as a lead, you don't want to do it my way because I think I'm better than you. That's bad. It's demoralizing for the person you're giving the feedback to, but it's also just not good for you either, because then you're not figuring out and justifying why you feel that way as a lead. When you have a set of goals and criteria, now all of a sudden we have something we can arbitrate. Like, again, going back to Far Harbor, deep narrative choices. I had a point where me and the designers were arguing about how many choices do we support in this expansion. We have a limited amount of time. Some of these things you want to do could be very risky and dangerous. It could force you to have to, work more. We have to crunch. We have to move the deadline. But because we had that goal, I could look at that and say, am I serving the goal by trimming things in that regard, in trimming the number of like narrative choices that you can make? And the answer is no, you're not serving that goal. So I had to stop myself and say, I have to let you go for it. Obviously I don't want you, working redonk hours or anything, but if you really want to add in that extra choice, I have to let you, because we agreed on that goal up front.
That's awesome. So then an example of a goal would be something like deep narrative choices. Is that right?
Deep narrative choices. It could be something as simple as like tone. Like Red Hook, the Darkest Dungeon guys did a great GDC talk about collaborative creative direction, because it's two people at the top of the company. They have to agree. So, hey, the Lovecraftian theme and narration, that was a goal. And so whenever they had an aesthetic argument, they had to look at it and says, is what we're doing furthering the goal of Lovecraftian horror or not? And if it is, then that's the answer. It's not what I want or what you want. It's whether these goals that we've agreed to are being served by what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Fantastic answer. We got it in on time. So it's time for us to close down. Before we say goodbye, we love to ask for homework here, Will. So what is something that we could assign to the listeners that'll take them about an hour, they can do in the next week to practice some of what we talked about here today?
So homework wise, if you have a job in games, then I would challenge you to sit down and look at your own queue, go through all the tasks that someone else has assigned you, and take a hard look at it and see if any of them are unreasonable or things that you would cut if you were in charge, and propose those changes to the person in charge. they might say no, but you've taken a step towards trying to be in control of your own destiny.
That's awesome. And if you aren't employed, you can absolutely do that on your personal projects. And maybe you can find another friend or somebody else who's studying what you're doing and sort of proxy them in as a manager.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Nice. Let's call it that. So your homework is to take a look at the tickets, the tasks that you have on your plate for whatever project you're currently working on, preferably, obviously, a game, and then find a real manager or a proxy manager and propose cuts to them and have that conversation. I love that. It's a nice, easy piece of homework. You can tag us on LinkedIn at the Indie Game Academy or William Shen here. It's now time to say goodbye. Will, would you like to give any final words of wisdom or plug anything here at the very end?
Oh yeah. Hey, check out Something Wicked Games. We're making our first title called Weird Song. So, it's made by Obsidian and Bethesda, the veterans. So, if you're an RPG fan, hopefully we'll be delivering something that you'll be very excited about. And then, just as a final word of thought, I like to say this, and that is, the art doesn't lie. Whoever you are comes out in your work. So don't be afraid to show all of what you are, and don't be afraid to ask the world to love you anyway.
What a fantastic final message. We'll include links to Something Wicked Games down below, as well as Will's upcoming game and anything else we may have mentioned in the episode down below. So go and check them out. Will, this has been such a great chat. I'm really happy to have finally got you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much, Will. It's been great talking to you again.
Heck yeah. Will plus Will. We'll see you again next week, Wednesday at 12 p.m. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for being here.